Welcome to this month's Schuman Talk, where we discuss issues we face in Europe today in the light of Robert Schumann's vision for a community of peoples deeply rooted in Christian values. On May the 9th in 1950, at 6 p.m., the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman gave a 3-minute speech in which he laid the foundation for the European house, where today 500 million Europeans live together in peace. This was the defining moment of post-war Europe, for it launched the European movement for peace and unity that has led to today's European Union. Speaking of a world peace to end centuries-old rivalries and of Europe's shared destiny and responsibilities to the world, he then proposed an economic project that was a political expression of Christian ideals of forgiveness and reconciliation. This proposal was for a European coal and steel community involving partner nations to cooperate in the production of coal and steel and mutual accountability, making the creation of a national war machine impossible. And there's been unprecedented peace between EU member states ever since. Robert Schumann's personal faith prompted him to enter the public square to promote peace, reconciliation, and justice. It shaped his lifestyle and his politics. A devout Catholic, Schumann led a very sober lifestyle, sometimes described as monkish. A Swiss newspaper described him as a model of integrity that set him apart from other French politicians. And so today we're going to focus in on this question of integrity and truth, as our guests are two of my Schumann Center colleagues, Ineta Lansdowne in Riga, Latvia, and Dr. Marinela Blaj in Iasi, Romania. Welcome, Mari. Welcome, Ineta, as we talk about abusing language to distort reality. Good to have you on the Schuman Talk. Recently, you engaged in a seminar during the State of Europe forum that we held in Paris around May the 9th, around Europe Day. This is why we have these Schuman Talks on the 9th day of each month, to recall that significant event that took place within 3 minutes. You can hardly make a cup of coffee in 3 minutes or boil an egg. And yet in that time, he laid the foundation for the European house. But he saw that integrity and truth was absolutely essential for the right foundations. And this is what I really want to explore with you both, about the importance of truth for the basis of democracy. Because what we're seeing these days is a great erosion of truth. Obviously, you know, we're all very, very conscious of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Of course, in Russia, it's not an invasion at all. It's just a special military operation. But we can also, you know, we're having a lot of headlines right now about Boris Johnson, who certainly has not been an icon of truth, or going on in America right now, the inquiry concerning January the 6th and Trump's role in that. So this is an issue that's affecting us both east and west. Now, this is also the week, just last Wednesday was the anniversary of the martyrdom of the Czech reformer Jan Hus. And he was martyred in 1415 in Constance during a papal council. And his famous quote was that truth prevails, or even here in more detail, the rule of sevens. He said, seek the truth, hear the truth, learn the truth, love the truth, speak the truth, adhere to the truth, defend it to the death, for truth will free you. And it was Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, the Russian dissident, who urged his fellow countrymen to live the truth and not to live the lie. And later it was Vaclav Havel who picked up on what Jan Hus said in his own country of Czechia, and made Hus's statement his own presidential motto: truth prevails. And so before we go further in this whole matter of truth and the distortion of truth, the abuse of language, and undermining our communication with each other, I want to ask you both, Mari and Ineta. I know you both live in countries that border either Ukraine, well, what let's say border what used to be the Soviet Union or was part of the Soviet Union. Right now, Ineta, you're living in Latvia that borders Russia. And Mari, you're living in Romania, right on the Moldovan, very close to the Moldovan border. And both of you are engaged, have been engaged in some way in responding to the Ukrainian crisis. Mari, tell us a little bit about your involvement.
Well, Iași is very nearby the Moldavian border, but there is about 2 hours maximum to the Ukrainian border. So what we did from the beginning was to decide to host for short term, like 2-3 nights, refugees, and we did it for the first weeks of the war. Almost every other night, we had new family with kids or old people, and we helped them to find their way out of. To find a ticket on a plane to go to kids in Western Europe, or to find a place in a train to go farther, or to find another medium term space to live here in Iași, or to find a family to take them as a whole family in England, for example. So calling the embassy, calling the officials, all kind of assistance with refugees. That is how we started.
Mm-hmm.
And then we started to receive donations of all kinds and calls of needs of all kinds, especially from Czernowitz. The area of Czernowitz is the northern part of Romania, where many Ukrainians went. Those Ukrainians who were constrained to leave their area because of bombs, but they didn't want to leave Ukraine. So a lot of Ukrainian refugees are in the area of Chernivtsi, as they are in the border with Poland as well. Mm-hmm. So we started to receive requests from that area for mattresses, for gas, for food, of course. So we mobilized churches and other communities and sponsors, and we organized transportation. And then we realized we have contacts in Kharkov, and our contacts in Kharkov are very much involved in supporting the affected population there. Then we started to look for transportation to send humanitarian help to Kharkov, where we help hospitals, hospices. We are still doing that. I mean, my colleague just went back from Chernowitz 2 days ago, and now we try to partner with others to rebuild some buildings to receive more refugees. And there are orphanages who relocate. There is an orphanage who walked literally from Ukraine with few adults into Romania. But others, they were brought here by buses. And Iași orphanages are hosting most of the orphans from Ukraine in Romania. Mm. So we have a project to mobilize Ukrainians who are refugees in Iași to go to those orphanages to visit Ukrainian orphans. Mm-hmm. And we bought books from Ukraine to help them here. And so we are looking to what kind of needs they are and what can we do. And we are daily doing something.
Now, your own personal circumstances prohibit you from being mobile and traveling, but you're using your telephone constantly, coming up with fresh ideas as to what can be done.
And very much, yes. I realized how much I can do from my armchair. I didn't realize before the crisis.
Wonderful. And Ineta, how have you been involved?
In many different ways. I think first I wanted to say that even though Latvia is a bit further, well, Ukraine is a bit further from Latvia, we don't have direct border. We do have direct border with Russia and Belarus, though. And right now, we are receiving Ukrainians who have been deported from Ukraine to Russia, and then once they are released, then through Russia, they travel to Latvia, which now is mostly a transit country. Again, it has many various reasons. One of it is the geographic location. I mean, there are Ukrainians who look on the map, and when they see who our neighboring countries are, they want to get further away, from Russia or Belarus. The other reason is government assistance. Latvia, I think has reached almost full capacity as far as how much they can help. In the first few months, though, was all hands on deck, the same as in Ukraine. I mean, still is for many churches and individuals, people who are hosting Ukrainians. And I have two neighbors where my husband and I rented this private home. Then upstairs there were some empty rooms, and there's a family from Kharkiv as well, which Mari mentioned, this city in the east. The solidarity with Ukraine also on the national level. If you came to Riga, you would see Ukrainian flags everywhere. In fact, that's what most foreigners comment on, that they have never seen that many Ukrainian flags. Ukrainians comment on that that they feel like there are more flags here than it was back home for them. And maybe through the conversation, I think it will explain why this tragedy is resonating so deeply with the people in Latvia and, of course, in Romania as well. But especially for us, since we were part of the Soviet Union, just like Ukraine was. So we share a lot of history. And now we share this pain. And it has, of course, opened a lot of old wounds, a lot of trauma, collective trauma that's still in Latvian society. And again, I think we will touch on that as we talk about abuse of language and abuse of truth and these concepts. And it's very much all hands on deck on the government level and on the individual, maybe limited financially. I know militarily, of course, government has done what they can and will continue. And I will, if you listen to interviews, you always see the same countries mentioned who show, I would say, the most solidarity is always the Baltic countries, Poland, Romania. Again, those who were either the post-Soviet or the post-communist, and for obvious reasons, because in many ways with us, Ukrainians don't have to explain anything. We understand.
Yes. Tell us, Ineta, where are you right now? Where are you speaking to us from?
I'm actually at my work, which is the Museum of the Occupation of Latvia in Riga, in the old town Riga. I'm actually wearing I'm not officially representing museum in this conversation, but I have my my logo here from the museum. So after we talk, I may go and give a tour, maybe to some foreign visitors this afternoon who come and learn about the history of Latvia and last century, in the 20th century, when Latvia was occupied 3 times during World War II. So we had Soviet, Nazi, and then Soviet again occupation. Of course, second one was the longest till 1991 when Latvia became independent again. So that's what I do. It's very educational work.
This building that you're in is now the Museum of the Occupation, but what did it used to be?
I know, Jeff, you're asking because you think I'm in the KGB headquarters. Today, I'm not in the KGB headquarters.
Oh, in another place. Okay.
Yeah, I'm in another. But this building also, in the Soviet time, it was built during the Soviet days, and then it was dedicated to the Latvian Red Riflemen. We had all kinds of riflemen, but this was particularly to highlight the red ones. And now this building has been transformed as well from the original concept. Of course, the history tells now, but it's also significant that we are in that former Soviet-built building.
And when you spoke to us from During the Paris seminar, you were speaking online like you are now, but then you spoke from the other building, which you called the Factory of Lies. It was the former KGB headquarters.
Yes.
But you just talked about you share a border with Belarus, where the KGB headquarters is still the KGB headquarters, just one border away. Yeah. Mari, what is the connection between language and truth?
Well, this is my interest for several years now. My interest in language and how do we use language and how do we abuse language and how much we build up or we destroy through language. And now it's a well-known fact that in 2016, I think, Oxford Dictionary named the word of the year the word post-truth. And it is post-truth is now on everybody's lips.
Yes.
We are living in a post-truth society. Mm-hmm. Okay, post-truth is defined as a concept of a political and philosophical concept to describe the fact that all shared objective standards for truth disappeared. Therefore, now what is really important, it's more my sense, my opinion, my feelings. So there are alternative facts, there are alternative knowledge, there are beliefs. So much more concepts come together in a discussion, and truth is not the main concept anymore. So everything is related with language, because what is truth? The truth is correspondence between what it is, I mean the reality, and what is said. In order to be said, we need language. So the language is our only tool to protect truth. But I realize more and more that the problem with truth now is, and with post-truth, this recent concept, is that we tend to refer so much to a very long history of Europe where truth was something that we build our society and our science and our institutions and everything. But that is very much a Jewish Christian concept. The truth is not something with the same importance in all societies. So I think this situation, what we are facing now, it's a reverse of a whole European society to something that it was before Christianity. So I don't know if I answered the question the way that you expected.
Yes,
I think it's extremely significant to discuss the language.
So if you don't have a truth basis for language, what does that eventually lead to?
I mean, we could use language to manipulate. We could use language to lie. We could use language to tell myths, not history. Stories, not history. You know. So the language is not necessarily the tool that will lead us to truth.
Yeah. So going back to Schumann and the era after the Second World War, he understood that the truth had to be faced, and had to be the truth, and had to be responded to. Both sides needed to actually admit the truth to each other and ask forgiveness for things being wrong. And I think it's widely accepted that kind of forgiveness process did not happen in the eastern part of Europe. The swamp was not drained, if we can reuse Trump's phrase. And there was not a truth basis laid after the war in the East. But on the West, there was an attempt to try to be true to one another, and the opportunity that the Allies took to actually embrace the Germans as full partners, the defeated party as an equal partner in the new Europe, was all part of this, rebuilding on truth. So community really does require a truth basis, doesn't it? Ineta, you had a comment?
Yeah, quick remark. When you were, again, you just mentioned this divide, right? East and West. And that's the reality, of course, the Iron Curtain, the infamous Iron Curtain. And here again in my work, so we analyze and we talk about both totalitarian systems, the Nazi Germany and the Communist Soviet Union. So both East and Western superpowers. And as you know, in the West, the Nazi Germany was scrutinized, as we sometimes, I remember I watched History Channel, kind of nicknamed it the Hitler Channel, because it seemed it's just all about Nazi Germany, Nazis, Hitler, Nazis, Hitler. But of course, Communist Soviet Union, because it was behind the Iron Curtain, many facts were not known or not as interesting because it did not affect the Western countries directly. And as you know, also integrating this European story, history, the facts, and I think even now with the war in Ukraine, as you know, and for many people, especially in the Western part of Europe, it's a lot of new information. It's like very steep learning curve. Even what is Ukraine? What's the history of Ukraine? Or, many things were not known. And then again, that becomes really important and very responsible task, as Mari said, the language. For people have to catch up very quickly with what's happening, and then they need those tools. Again, they need the right language, even to call things what they are, like to call things the right name. And but if I may add to our conversation another angle, which I know for all of us is important, is from a Christian point of view, from a Christian theology point of view. Commitment to truth is commitment to right relationships. And of course, that connects with Robert Schumann, as again, the concept of community. So that's relationships. So to have to have right relationships, you must have truth. And then again, you will need language to convey those facts, and to embrace each other. You have to go through all those things that Jan Hus talked about. You have to seek, you have to hear, you have to be willing to listen. As you know, seeking truth and building right relationships it's a double process, because you have to be on your side, you have to go to the other side, then you have to come back to yours. It involves all of those things, but you have to be willing. And as we see now, you emphasize democracy, but we can say it's the breakdown in relationships. Like if right relationships, if shalom, as we understand it in this holistic way, we're not here to build democracy, but to build God's kingdom.
Yes.
Which again, in the bigger concept, shalom, right relationships, which require
everything is rightly related together, right?
Yes, yeah. Related together in the right way, which involves, of course, remembering past rightly. What Croatian theologian Miroslav Volf talks about. It's very important how we remember the past. Again, if our goal is right relationships in the present and the future, we will be responsible, or we will feel the responsibility to remember rightly. And then, so this umbrella or the ultimate goal are right relationships. And then, as we say, that the first casualty in war is truth, right?
Yes.
And we see with these deteriorating relationships, then of course truth is casualty, because relationships are broken.
That's very helpful. If we look at the root of the whole problem, it's the broken relationship that started in Eden with God, with each other, with ourselves, and with our environment. And the gospel is really all about restoring the right relationships in all of these areas, starting with God, starting with ourselves, starting with each other, and the environment around us.
If
course,
you
yes,
allow me to intervene, Jeff, I want to underline something that happened slowly in history. Christianity brought this concept of person, the personalistic approach, which slowly over the centuries developed into individualistic state of facts. And it describes very much the Western part of Europe. To keep this sort of distinction that we started to work with already, the West and the East. Exactly. So the individualistic approach to life in the Western societies is based in Christianity, or in what Paul says, basically. And initially, it was extremely significant. It was very important to make the human person being free and responsible. And in the eastern part of Europe, that influence was not so strong anymore. The community continued to be more important than the individual. This is why when bad ideologies grasped our societies, it was expected and understandable to sacrifice individuals for the good of the communities, to sacrifice some for the good of many, which is also very biblical if you want to decontextualize it. But the discussion about truth, it's again very different, because the truth is much more significant in the western part of Europe. And I think it helped in the reconciliation between France and Germany, between Schumann and Adenauer, because there were societies based in a very common philosophical ground, related both the language and truth, which is not the case with the Eastern countries, where, again, the commitment toward the truth is not the same. There is much more commitment to the power and what it's the, not community is a positive word, but the group. So
a false loyalty, a false
exactly.
nationalism.
Exactly. So if we tend to look now to the relationships between Ukrainians and Russians, and to compare it or expect the same kind of resolution and we had between Adenauer and Schumann, I am not sure it's possible.
No, it's interesting if you think of the three values that were upheld during the French Revolution of liberty, equality, and brotherhood. Those are actually all Christian values as well, rooted in God's norms for humanity, freedom and equality. And it was Paul who talked about moral equality before God. And
there is no man, no woman, no Greek, no Jew.
That's right. Yes, and then the brotherhood. But when you take any one of these three out of the context of the sovereignty of God, you end up with an ism. You end up with liberalism or individualism. You end up with socialism and communism, and you end up with nationalism, the brotherhood. But of course, you can't have brotherhood without starting with a father. But when you take the father out of the picture, then each of these become absolutized and become an idol, along with other isms that we've developed in the West. It's taking something of God's good created order and absolutizing it, making an idol out of it. And we in the West have idolized individualism, but in the East it's been more the collectivism, the working together and sacrificing the individual for the whole.
What the West did in terms of freedom, for example, to get into extreme, gives a very good argument to the East to blame the West.
Yes, that's right.
The freedom was understood as limitless, which is not. My freedom stops not where your freedom starts, because if I am the stronger one, then my freedom will be always much bigger than your freedom, because I am the stronger one. My freedom my freedom stops where I decide it stops, because I have the capacity to control myself and to say, no, I will not touch that apple tree. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, it's what Rabbi Jonathan Sachs used to say, and I'm speaking to you from the heart of what's called the most liberal city in the world, Amsterdam. You have two sorts of liberty. One is really licentiousness, the freedom to do what I want. The other is what we truly can call liberty, the freedom to do what I ought, and that's the self-control that you're talking about. Now, Mari, what are some of the sources of authority for truth through the centuries and in our society today? Who determines what is truth?
Well, historically, there were several institutions. The church was a source of truth for a while, and the church was discredited, or all institutions contributed to their discreditation in a certain.
The church had to have the last word, such as Galileo and Copernicus. Yeah.
I mean, the academia was a source of truth in Europe for several centuries. It's not anymore.
It was under the church, but then it came out from under the church, and that became the
scientific realm. It does not have that authority anymore, and we experience it in the COVID crisis.
Yes.
It was so obvious that it's easier to believe conspiracy theory than to believe the science. We do not need more arguments. I mean, the media was for several centuries a source of truth. Well, we do not believe media anymore, because media became manipulative, became party pre.
And social media especially, yeah.
And social media took it into an extreme.
Yes.
So all kind of institutions.
And politics, of course. The political area was another source of...
Exactly. So we do not believe the politicians anymore.
Yeah.
For several decades now. So all the institutions who were sources of truth, they are not anymore. This is maybe why post-truth became why did Oxford decide it is the word of the year? Because they realized over the whole year was used a couple of thousand times more than the year before.
Yes.
So we do not have a source of truth anymore. So we are also so used to think, to reflect, and to have a dialogue in a context infused by Christian concepts and Christian worldview, including, and for me, there are more recent reflections. The old world, the antique history, which is my field, in fact, truth was not a concept. The problem of truth was not even there. It was very much as it is in the political international foreign relationships today, when a government has to deal with China or with India or with Arabic countries. They are built on other values than ours. Or with Japan. We don't understand what they understand when they say yes.
Yes.
We could not have a gentleman agreement with people who do not have the same base. Well, the history of humanity was not built on truth until the Jews, basically, until Sinai. The antique civilizations, what was important for them were the myths, not the truth. What we observe in our days, in the last decades, is the recurrence of myths. The myths are very much more important now than they used to be a century ago. And the myths are usually, I realize, in the Christian environment, the myths are considered lies, but they are not. The myths are just stories. They are not true, neither false. They are stories. and now the myths are very much important. That it's such a return to myths in our societies. So we have to realize that truth is something to be committed to only as Christians, because if not, we cannot expect it from others.
Yeah. Yes. Of course, truth has been subjected or submitted to political correctness as well. You are not allowed to speak the truth if it's politically inconvenient. And even just this week, here in the Netherlands, news has come out about the relationship between this new monkeypox and homosexual relationships. That all but one of the 352 cases we have in this country involve active homosexual relationships, but you're not allowed to talk about this. That has not been really. They're even talking about that. Well, we can't have a pride parade. This will be a dangerous situation for infection. Now, but of course, that's not politically correct to talk about these things. I'm just giving an example of how truth gets pushed to the side because it's just not fitting with our so-called liberal values.
And it gives very good fuel to
to
Mr. Putin's discourse, to Mr. Orban discourse.
Yes, absolutely. Ineta, do you have thoughts about the connection between facts and interpretation?
Yeah, of course, in all sorts of ways. It's just for my personal background growing up in the Soviet Union. And again, even daily, as I go through the history in the Museum of the Occupation of Latvia, it's just these reminders. And I realized how some of them I had started blocking out almost, like, because I just didn't want to remember, this distortion of truth, because it does a lot of harm, and you don't realize how harmful it was. And when you start remembering, this double think of or the mirror image of like the words, and maybe I don't know if I can get to those later, but I had a couple of slides from the Soviet times. Yeah, maybe if our technical assistants can show. Okay, here. Okay, I'll start in the order. This is just something from contemporary Russia. Yeah, of course you may have known of this precedent. This lady on one of the main TV channels in Russia protested for a few seconds. Yeah, with the no war. And as we know, there have been people in Russia trying to protest just with these two words, saying no war or stop war. And then I want to show in the next photo.
She was herself a presentator, and she said, I realize I've been part of a propaganda machine, and I want to stand up for what is true.
Yeah. So she jumped out for a few seconds. Then many people have tried to demonstrate in the Red Square. So here's a photo, for example. So instead of saying stop war or no war, in Russian it says dva slova, which means two words. And again, everyone understands what this means. And she is arrested and taken away. And then the next slide shows then a guy who now he's not even using letters, just the asterisks. And again, everyone understands that this means stop war, or in Russian would be нет войне, those letters. And again, this is like we live in, George Orwell 1984 or something in this society, of course, that's becoming totalitarian again, and where people being starved of these concepts. So, as Mari said, again, the words and language is the tool. And here is basically turning off the faucet. We call it tightening the screws, but here it's like, you can't even say this word. This word gets you in trouble, stop war, or calling it war, like you said. That's the crime, because if the TV screen tells that this is just a special operation, and I think that is the very interesting and I don't know what to call unique situation that we live in, that as Mari was describing this very postmodern or whatever, postmodern situation, again, in the so-called Western society of no authorities, where in contemporary Russia, you are back to domination of screens. I mean, I do want to say this is like living in that story of 1984. Total domination of screens, suppression of books, narrowing of vocabularies. I had written down, actually, was from Timothy Snyder's analysis, what happens in that kind of totalitarian society. And you see it all happening in front of our eyes. The words you cannot use, the words you cannot say. Then it goes after the mental armory of the people. So to wear down your resistance. So you think, oh, maybe I did misunderstand, or maybe I was wrong. Of course, many experts have used the concept of Stockholm syndrome with contemporary Russian society, where you're being victimized, but after a while you start believing that maybe the abuser is right. So maybe this screen is also right, what they're telling you. And yes, it's, we're the not the guilty ones, and we're right. But it changes how we remember the past, how we understand the present, and what we want from the future. And actually, in this totalitarian system, actually there is no future. And I think that's another separate but could be very long conversation. And how it was in Soviet Union, that after a while there was no vision of the future, because and then it was all about the past. And even now with Putin, you see it's all about the past. He doesn't give any vision, but it's like restoring the greatness. Or you mentioned other kind of pre-fascist tendencies, where it's going back to some kind of glory days. And then the language has to serve that goal, that now our story, like Mari said, it's not history. It's not informed conversation about what happened, but it's story, it's our myth. And then it's past oriented.
Like the joke that was in the Soviet times, the future is certain, it's the past that keeps changing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yes. You were talking about the how much do we see the collusion of Western media in this? I recently saw the film Mr. Jones, which was made about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was about what took place in the Soviet Union in Stalin's time. Mr. Jones was a Canadian journalist who got wind of, who was wondering how could Stalin be financing his industrial reformations? Where's the money coming from? And he investigated and discovered it was all the Ukrainian grain that he was stealing, and he managed to get down to Ukraine. As you know, it's a true story. They went down to Ukraine and discovered the awful famine and the deaths that were happening as a result of what the Western media, based in Moscow, were proclaiming as the Russian miracle or the Soviet miracle. Now, when Putin moved into the Crimea, how were Western journalists treating that story? They seem to also be too often echoing Putin's story versions of the story.
I cannot comment on that. I don't know.
I think, Ineta, you were saying some things about this in the seminar in Paris, or did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, I don't remember if I was then. I think actually, to answer this is where I would now say that our countries, what I mean, like Latvia, the Baltic countries, Romania, this is where I would put them again in this West, as members of European Union, for example, or because again, in Latvian context, there was this understanding of what is happening under this pretense of fake democracy, again, with Crimea, with the referendum. And yes, there was no military resistance. And maybe then it made it look like, yeah, maybe people, this is what they want. This is truly the will of the people. Again, but from Latvian historic context, this is exactly what happened in 1939 and then in 1940, with the same pretense of fake democracy, of elections, so-called elections that are organized, but they're under the presence of occupying military power, like under the guns, So you cannot have free elections. So again, this distortion of the word free, when you are controlled by a foreign army and foreign influence, then it can never be free. And so it's the same scenario, the same playbook that was used. And again, like I mentioned, for all these post-Soviet, post-communist countries, I mean, they could not be fooled at all. So like if you talk about Western journalists and those who were more informed, I think the understanding was similar, but maybe the one difference was that, again, in our part of Europe, societies and governments took it much more seriously. And actually, I would say when people ask me as a Latvian if Latvians are now afraid, I can answer, well, just as afraid as you are in France or in Germany or in UK, because we think this is the most tragic thing happening in Europe. There's war. But as far as society, there was more fear in 2014, exactly when annexation of Crimea happened. And you saw how this Soviet method was used, or the Soviet Union, that Putin used it again. And in some ways, it seemed like maybe it worked. Like in his mind, it seemed like it worked, like it was successful. And it made people here very afraid that, oh, maybe if he tried it there and he thought it works, then he will try it again somewhere else. Of course,
and
the alarm.
The Western response wasn't.
Yeah.
It is now. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say this is where the difference was, where here the alarm bells went like, the sirens were loud here. Where, I think the further you were, and historically, if you didn't have this context and that collective memory, you didn't take it seriously and you didn't think it was a threat. That's just the first step, and now it will get into more, something more bigger and more tragic even.
Well, you grew up in the Soviet Union, when Latvia was still part of the Soviet Union, and I've heard you talk about the use of the words that actually meant the opposite to you, the way that use of word meaning the opposite. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and I think I can think of two examples. One I don't have a slide for, but as I'm working in the museum, I think a lot about the word freedom, because that was one of the popular words used a lot in Soviet Union. We're a free society, like proletarians of the whole world unite. Of course, the freedom in understanding there's this class warfare, and then there's these upper classes that suppress, and you have to be set free, kind of like a slave, like a pharaoh, and almost like the Exodus story. And I was looking at these propaganda posters from 1939 and 1940, when full Soviet occupation came, and all the slogans are "Long live free Latvia." It means like for freedom. And then they wrote in their all their party programs that now we get rid of the old regime, which in our constitution it said that Latvia is a free, independent, democratic republic. But for the Soviet regime, that was the old regime where you were not free. So it was complete opposite to, it was turned upside down, what freedom means. And then another word, which I did mention in my Paris talk, was peace. Of course, again, as Christians, we talk about peace a lot. We just talked about shalom. But that concept, again, if you ask, okay, Soviet regime's version, what is your understanding of peace? As there was this anecdote in Soviet Union, they said there will be such a fight for peace that no stone will be left unturned.
So if we can go back to that poster again,
that
that we just
poster.
saw, the Russian word for peace is that last word mir, right? The third
and
word
actually it also can mean the world, mir, like as the world, but also peace. But again, in our Christian understanding, peace means not to just how to say speak truth, but also to do truth. So you cannot say I love peace, but you do something opposite from peace.
Yes, and this is the Ruski mir is the phrase, is the doctrine that Putin is teaching of going back to a Russian realm of so-called peace where Russia rules and all the other nations are under its hegemony.
Are subjugated.
And this is what it's objecting to concerning Ukraine. It will not let Ukraine, doesn't want to let Ukraine slip out from that. And so this is in the name of Ruski mir, Russian peace, he is invading Ukraine. So that's what you're saying. In the name of peace, he's creating a war.
Yes. So in the name of peace, you create war. And that was, of course, the whole Cold War story was in the name of universal peace. Soviet Union is willing to, to make more weapons, to fight more wars. And we all knew that even as a child. And, I will maybe just very quickly share that may have been even my first interaction with the Bible, because I did not grow up in a Christian home or religious home, but my grandmother was Christian. And one time she took me to church for Christmas. I was very young. And I remember they were reading from the Gospel of Luke, the famous quote that we hear at Christmas time usually. What did the angels proclaim? And the first words were peace on earth. And I remember as a child, I actually started crying and I couldn't put it in words, but I understood that actually they're talking about real peace. That there's actually peace that's like not this, propaganda peace, that we will fight and we will destroy you all, to have our version of peace. But this is actually God's peace for all people. And this is the good news. And Jesus is sent to create this peace. And I was crying uncontrollably. I mean, it was healing. It was setting me free. Like we say, truth will set you free. And for the first time in my life, I felt like this meaning, the peace, the word itself, has a very different meaning.
So you associated so often that word and the dove was associated with nuclear weapons, right?
Believe me, sorry, but I still don't like dove. The symbol of dove, it's not my favorite, because exactly here you see and I was a pioneer wearing a red scarf, and and there's the white dove, and sorry, no, they spoiled it for me. The dove is.
I think you have another slide there where you're showing the weapons. Yes.
Yes, and this is again, the fight for peace with nuclear weapons that supposedly they're smashing them, right? And then again, this double speak and double think. So we're against nuclear war, but we're making more nuclear weapons. So
they're fighting the nuclear weapons with nuclear weapons. Yeah. And the right-hand one poster seems to inspire the ambition for young boys to grow up to be soldiers and be part of this fighting for peace. This is a contradiction in itself.
Yeah, and also actually what did they inspire? They tried to inspire in young people, and that's again one of these very dangerous angles, was to always look for enemies, because you had the outside enemies, which was the Americans and their allies, and then you have the inside enemies, the traitors. And there were all these stories, and I see Mari is nodding because she knows what I'm talking about. Who are the inside enemies? And we were told all these stories that, these brave children who turned their own parents in because they knew their parents are anti-Soviet or anti-revolutionary, or they're, bourgeois or whatever. Like, these were the heroes they would find for children to teach them that, again, as Mari said, the collective is the most important. You're part of the collective. The goal of the collective is this. And then if you know what a traitor, and even if it's your own parents, then your loyalty is to the collective, not to your parents. So you should turn them in.
This is frightening when we hear you talk about this, what's going on in America, the idea of the traitors and the patriots, and the term rhino, R-I-N-O, Republican in name only. If a Republican is not prepared to support Trump, for example. And it's rather frightening to see in the world's most powerful democracy, so-called, this tendency. And unfortunately, America's going down in the democracy index. When you see those charts of it's got a very faulty democracy. And yeah,
because you mentioned the United States politics. I would like to say something, not about the United States per se, but about the current Western politics. It becomes so polarized. I mean, I noticed it recently in France with their elections. Mm-hmm. It is very much like that here in Romania, keeping the scale. I wouldn't say the same about Germany, but also because I didn't follow it with the same interest as I did for the France, or I did for the United States. And in a way, it echoes the situation with Russia and the rest of the world, the free world. We tend to, everything is extremely polarized.
Yes.
The democracy, it's about competing solutions for the common good. And we come into a public arena and we say, if we solve our economical, social problems this way, we are going further. It's for the most good of many. Now, it's not like that anymore. We are competing with the enemy, and our competitor is not an alternative. It's the evil, and that is not democracy. I mean, that it's really dangerous if we are unable to have a dialogue about alternative solutions proposed to go further or to solve or whatever, and just claiming that the opponent is the evil one, then we the West are in trouble.
Yes, definitely, and this is the undermining of democracy with the polarization, them and us.
Exactly.
And this is the genius of the vision of Robert Schuman, was upholding the common good. And he talked about the European soul, or the soul of Europe, being that which had animated Europe from the start. And he meant by that the Christian understanding of God and human beings and how we should then live. But he also talked about the spirit of Europe. And the spirit of Europe was given this soul. Out of this soul came the desire to choose for the welfare of the whole, the common good. And he even talked in those days about Russia in the future becoming part of this common house as well, seeking the common good. And this
he spoke about North Africa. Schuman spoke about North Africa in the future. It was very inclusive.
In that 3-minute speech he gave, our responsibility to the rest of the world, particularly Africa, because we have a special responsibility as Europeans after the rush for colonization into Africa, and they are.
It was very inclusive. Yes. And now we are more and more exclusive.
Yes, and this is it's interesting that only a couple of few years after all the talk about Brexit and would Frexit be the next Grexit and so on, now we're seeing nations lining up into the waiting room, but and having a common enemy right now, the responding to Putin's war has united the rest of Europe, but the rest of Europe really needs to be united on a value base, and that is choosing for the common good of the whole. And that requires statesmanship, and there's not a lot of those statesmen around, or stateswomen around, unfortunately.
What you are saying now, it's extremely important, because in a way we are we are glad to see the Western countries coming again together. But the problem is that we are coming together against somebody, which
Yes.
is very, very much old history.
Yes.
This is not Christian solution to humanity.
Right.
It's old pagan solution to unity against one victim.
We have to guard our hearts not to become anti-Russian in our thinking.
Exactly. And just discussing with Ukrainian friends, it's very, very complicated. You cannot
Yes.
speak with Ukrainian Christians about reconciling future, because they are openly hating Russia and Russians, and they do not separate anymore. So
and while Schumann was in solitary confinement under the Gestapo, he was writing to the underground saying, "We French will have to learn to love and forgive the Germans to rebuild Europe after the war." Now, that's very difficult, of course, to say right now. A Ukrainian pastor said to me, "Well, that's like telling a joke at a funeral." And I understand that. But
and I think, if I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know we had a little bit of discussion even at the Paris meeting, and we had one person join us, and we had this discussion. I remember Mari's comment, because I have heard so many times now again about the language, and of course we have used so much the word propaganda. And as we know, after World War II, it really gained this negative connotation, right? Because there was the Soviet propaganda, Nazi propaganda. Again, here in our history, we have both posters in the museum. And many people have said, well, but now, there's the Russian propaganda and then there's Ukrainian propaganda. And again, once you start differentiating, yes, in the war, of course, it's, in this situation, as far as facts, maybe, I don't know how many soldiers have died or what happened, who shot this rocket, things like that. Of course, nobody can know actually every detail on the ground, because how can you? Russians, Ukrainians for sure cannot know, and we could not know at all. We're not there. But where this conversation was wrong, or the point was wrong, was when you take basically, then there's the two sides.
And we make it
wasn't talking about the facts, but it was saying, well, they're doing something wrong and they're doing something wrong. And in that sense, there is no symmetry at all. It's a very black and white situation, actually, if there has been ever, where you have the aggressor and you have the country that's being attacked and invaded, and they are the victim. And as Mari, I remember, kept saying, of course, the victim is not innocent. We know that from the Bible story, Exodus story. The children of Israel, in that story, we know who God sides with. He sides with the victim. He's on their side. And I mean, we have this whole 1,000-year-long history because of Exodus. But then we read what they do on the way. They grumble, how they are. Of course, they're not innocent. Like we all have sinned. But God always sides with the victim. And so I have to constantly get into conversations where people go from the kind of this unclarity, uncertainty about actually what's happening on the ground, maybe in the numbers and to this bigger picture that somehow there's just two sides. And since we don't know, we don't take sides, and that this is not the case. But again, there's a language aspect that is so crucial.
Thank you, Ineta and Mari. I think that's a very good place to bring our conversation to a close, as has been very helpful and perspective offering. And thank you very much for all that you are both engaged in. And hopefully in our next month's Schuman Talk in August, we'll be hearing from Al and Carolyn Akimov. This is yet to be confirmed, but Al and Carolyn have been involved with the Slavic world all their lives, really. Al actually is descended from Ukrainians, has amazing stories to tell about his family. And right now he's visiting in Ukraine And we're going to be hearing stories from the Ukrainian front lines and getting some historical perspective as well, from the many decades that he and his wife have been involved in, starting with open doors with Brother Andrew, but also realizing we shouldn't just be going to the one found sheep. What about the 99 lost sheep? And so they began both to reach out to in evangelism, even long before the Berlin Wall came down. So we'll be hearing from them, I hope, in a month's time. And we've made several references to the State of Europe Forum that took place in Paris exactly 2 months ago. And you can find the plenary sessions of that here on this YouTube address, the same as the Schuman Talks here. You can go there and you can see the plenary address is already up there, and some of the seminars going to be posted there shortly. And before I finish, I just want to mention one more thing, and that is the last week of August, we'll be holding our Schuman Center Summer School of European Studies in Paris. Sorry, not in Paris, in Brussels. It'll be an opportunity, if we can have the next slide, it'll be an opportunity to get to know what is actually happening there in Paris, and to have to learn from both Evert van der Pol, Professor Evert van der Pol, who's our resident researcher as the Schuman Center, and myself will be talking about the perspectives of Europe historically, as well as trying to understand what's going on in Europe today. We'll be visiting places like the Erasmus House to learn about Erasmus, or the place where the Bible translator William Tyndale was martyred. We'll be going out to Waterloo, the battlefield, which was such a significant turning point for modern Europe, and we'll be getting to know some of the institutions of the European Union. And so we invite you to join us there in Brussels, the 22nd to 26th of August. Thank you for joining us for this month's Schuman Talk.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mari. It was good to see you all.
All the best.